Good evening, everybody. I'm so pleased to welcome you to this thank you event for Christian Aid supporters in the company of Malcolm Guite, and good evening to you as well, Malcolm. Malcolm and his family have been great supporters of Christian Aid for many years, and he's known as a caring and compassionate person, and we can hear that in the poetry that he writes. Malcolm is a poet-priest and has written many best-selling and critically acclaimed books, and especially a biography of Samuel Taylor Coleridge, which has received excellent reviews. I'm certainly looking forward to reading his next book, entitled Lifting the Veil, Imagination and the Kingdom of God, when it's released later this year. Malcolm is invited regularly to speak at events and festivals across the world, and so we're especially pleased and privileged to hear him tonight. I remember hearing Malcolm in Norwich Cathedral just a few years ago to a packed out room, and people still comment to me now how good an event it was for Christian Aid. As a Norfolk resident myself, I'm delighted that Malcolm will be moving to Norfolk, and I hope to see and hear him live soon. So Malcolm, welcome. I'm so pleased that you're with us. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this, and it's over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Julian, and it's great to be with you. And may I just begin returning thanks with thanks. I understand, that we're doing this in part as a thank you to all those Christian Aid volunteers. And that's quite a tough ask, even in a good year, to be out there and doing things with the envelopes and putting on events and sponsored things and just raising awareness of Christian Aid. But I know from our own experience in the parish here that it's been an extra challenge in this year when we've had so many restrictions. But I guess it's also a year that's really focused our minds on the way the whole web of our human life across the world is completely interconnected. The way we're, they say 6 degrees of separation from everybody. It's not just 6 degrees. We are one body, and I think we've seen that in the negative sense of the way an infection has spread, but we've also seen it in the positive sense in the way compassion has spread. So I'm just going to share some poems with you, which I hope will be an encouragement. I hope they'll be part of a celebration of the natural world and a call to look after the world in light of global warming. But I hope they'll also just be a pleasure and an uplift and something transfigurative for you. So I thought we'd begin with a poem of mine called The Singing Bowl, which happens to begin with the word begin, so it seems a good one to start with. And I'm going to read this as a kind of stilling, centering poem. I wrote it as I thought about what I needed to do before I could write a poem. It's about getting ready to write, beginning the song. But I think I found it was about much more than that by the time I'd finished, that it was about prayer and stillness before God as well. So I'll read this one, The Singing Bowl. Begin the song exactly where you are. Remain within the world of which you're made. Call nothing common in the earth or air. Accept it all and let it be for good. Start with the very breath you breathe in now. This moment's pulse, this rhythm in your blood, and listen to it, ringing soft and low. Stay with the music. Words will come in time. Slow down your breathing. Keep it deep and slow. Become an open singing bowl whose chime is richness rising out of emptiness, and timelessness resounding into time. And when the heart is full of quietness, begin the song exactly where you are. So we've made that beginning. I want to read a couple of sonnets to you now from two different books, one from Sounding the Seasons and the other from my book After Prayer, which are both in their different ways about what all of you do, about that life of service, about volunteering, giving up a bit of time, organizing things, making them happen. The first of these, which is called A Last Beatitude and is part of my set of poems around All Saints, around our thanksgiving for our life together in church. I was thinking particularly of those who volunteer in churches, and I know many of you doing Christian Aid do it from within a church base. And I think I wouldn't be far wrong in guessing that if you're the kind of person who's willing to get on the Christian Aid rater and do things, I bet you're on the coffee rater as well, and all kinds of things. So although this poem doesn't make mention of Christian Aid, I hope it comes as a blessing, a beatitude for many of you taking part in this. It's just called A Last Beatitude. And blessed are the ones we overlook, the faithful servers on the coffee rater, the ones who hold no candle, bell or book, but keep the books and tally up the quota, the gentle souls who come to do the flowers, the quiet ones who organize the fete, church sitters who give up their weekday hours, doorkeepers who may open heaven's gate. God knows the depths that often go unspoken among the shy, the quiet and the kind, or the slow healing of a heart long broken, placing each flower so for a year's mind. Invisible on earth without a voice, in heaven their angels glory and rejoice. And some time ago, our cathedral here in the Diocese of Ely Cathedral decided to have a special service for carers, for all those people who quietly and often unnoticed were involved in caring for someone else. I was amazed to discover how many children are carers of parents, how many children, before they go to school are, helping disabled parents, and of course, people helping their partners. And I wrote this poem for that service before the pandemic. But of course, the pandemic has really brought out for us how much we all depend on the carers in our society. And of course, I know that Christian Aid, because it works in partnership, is always working with people in other places who are carers and supporting them, particularly working with women who are caring, for children or caring for others or caring for the clarity and cleanliness of the water in their village, or all kinds of things. So this is I call this one a sonnet for the unseen. In a way, it was a continuation. I'd wrote it after the first one I've just read you. It was a continuation of that theme of the unnoticed care. Sonnet for the unseen. So much goes unseen and stays unsaid. So much that carers keep within their hearts. The children who get parents out of bed already tired before their school day starts. The neighbours who keep giving up their time to add a daily round of extra care. Veronicas who cleanse the sweat and grime, and those whose gift is simply being there. The patient partners lifting up a cross to bear the burden their beloved bears, who ease each other through the pain and loss and feel that no one sees and no one cares. But there is one to hear, to feel, to see. And he will say, "You did it unto me." And I think we can extend that to the way, through networks like Christian Aid, we care for one another across a global community. And I do think those words from Matthew's Gospel, words of Jesus's final judgment and view on things, will apply to all the care that we've been able to offer one another through an organization like Christian Aid, that he will say of that too, "You did it unto me." So I wanted to start with those poems, because this is very much about a thank you. But I'm also conscious that we've been thinking about care not only for one another, but care for creation, care for our planet. Of course, those are not separate things. In his brilliant encyclical Laudato Si, Pope Francis made it clear that environmental or ecological justice and human justice are not in competition with one another. They're the same thing. That caring for people precisely means caring for the environment and helping, say, communities, for example, in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, you know, to deal with and recover from the pollution of the oil industry there, but also to find other new and better ways of making their subsistence. Now, one of the things that I did in lockdown, I had a couple of lockdown writing projects, which both issued in little books. The first of them was a series called Quarantine Quatrains. It was just a little pamphlet which I did in collaboration with the great English painter, spiritual mystical painter Roger Wagner, and it started off as a series of gentle reflections on the return of nature, the sense that we were back in touch in a deeper way as the roads were all quiet and the places were still, and we suddenly realized that nature could burgeon and more if we were treading with a slightly less heavy foot on it. In the end, the poem turned, it was a sequence of poems, to thinking about carers, and I ended up dedicating the book to the Care Workers Charity and including an elegy. But I thought I'd like to read you a little passage from it. It's the penultimate part, it's number 6, which is a kind of appreciation of how nature revived, because I think that revival of nature gives us hope that if we can find a lighter way of living on the earth, we can hope that nature will recover and that we can be in partnership with her rather than trying to dominate her as we do now. And indeed, the poem ends with the words, "a lighter touch." So Roger Wagner did a rather lovely painting to go with this of the empty streets and you know, a sort of flamingo crossing, which was one of the photos that's ever taken. So I start by, my poem was written in response to Fitzgerald's wonderful translation, 19th century translation of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, which has some great celebrations of nature. So I start with 2 lines quoting him, and then I go on, and I use just the same stanza form, the quatrain that he used. So perhaps this will bring back some memories of that first lockdown and the kind of, dark as it was for so many of us, the kind of unexpected bonus of hearing the bird song again and seeing things come back. So here is section 6 of Quarantine Quatrains. Starts with the quote. "They say the lion and the lizard keep the courts where Yamshed gloried and drank deep. But now in every corner of the world, the wild things flourish whilst the cities sleep. For when they see our influence abate, the banished creatures soon resume their state. Blithe dolphins sport along the Grand Canal, coyotes call across the Golden Gate. The grass grows green in every city square. The little foxes, once so shy and rare, saunter our streets and boulevards by day, whilst birds and insects throng the cleaner air. How soon the tide of nature has returned, how soon renew the forests that we burned, how soon they seed and repossess our streets, those precious plants and animals we spurned. Perhaps in all this crisis, all this pain, this reassessment of our loss and gain, nature rebukes our brief authority, yet offers us the chance to start again, and this time with a new humility, with chastened awe and mutual courtesy, to re-accept the unearned gift of life with gratitude, with joy and charity. Perhaps we'll learn to live without so much, to nurture and to cherish, not to clutch. And if I'm spared, I'll hold the years I'm given with gentler tenure and a lighter touch. So that was a sense that somehow out of this crisis might come hope and renewal. In fact, thinking particularly about the effects of climate change, global warming, just before this big crisis of the COVID, I think we were all transfixed by the unprecedented series of fires in Australia, the whole part of that continent really on fire. And many of us thought this is perhaps part of the wake-up call. And I was asked at around that time to provide some verses for a new anthem, which was being composed by the wonderful a young composer, Rhiannon Randall, who is one of the sort of new emerging group of women modern classical composers, for a thing rather wonderfully called Choral Eco Song. And I wrote a sonnet called Our Burning World, in which I lament these losses and depredations, and I imagine the earth herself speaking to us. But again, I think the poem turns at the end to the possibilities of redemption and a new start. And I'm very impressed by the fact that Christian Aid and some of the other organizations, which were originally to do entirely with, if you like, immediate humanitarian compassion, have come to see that humanitarian compassion cannot be separated from issues of climate change and climate justice and ecological justice. So here is, this has never been published or collected anywhere. I'm not sure I've read it publicly. I think it's only been sung in the anthem as it was sung at St. Bride's in Fleet Street a year or two back. So it's lovely to be able to share it, I think, as a sort of premiere. It's a poem with you. Our Burning World. Our burning world is turning in despair. I hear her seething, sighing through the air. Oh, rouse yourself. This is your wake-up call. For your pollution forms my funeral pall. My last ice lapses, slips into the sea. Will you unfreeze your tears and weep for me? Or are you sleeping still, taking your rest? The hour has come that puts you to the test. Wake up to change at last, and change for good. Repent, return, replant the sacred wood. You are my children, I too am God's child, and we have both together been defiled. But God hangs with us on the hallowed tree, that we might both be rescued, both be free. It happened that at the evensong for which that was set, in the ordinary course of the lectionary, the reading was the Garden of Gethsemane, and the disciples falling asleep, and Jesus coming and say, "Are you still asleep? Are you sleeping still? Watch with me. Can you not watch 1 hour?" And so I felt that voice, that saying, could be taken up and, as it were, given to the earth herself, and saying, "Wake up, wake up. Work with me to change things." So that seems to me to introduce a little bit of a theme of creation, but I don't want us to be, as it were, focused entirely on crisis. If we want to save and spare the earth, it's because we love her, and because we are, her children. We're all God's children. And in my poem, Mother Earth says, "I too am God's child." We're all of this together. So I want to frame that very clearly. But so I think if we're to take action, we also need to do so in the midst of a joy and delight in creation. And my other lockdown project was a kind of very slow, renewed reading of the Book of Psalms. As you know, I'm sure you know, as priests and deacons, those of us that are ordained are set, as it were, in the lectionary Psalms to read every day. And to be honest, you can get in, you just rattle them off, did I even say that? But I think lockdown made the Book of Psalms come alive for me in a new way. And so much of it seemed to be prophetic. So much of it seemed to speak into our crisis. But so much of it also was delighting in the goodness of God's creation. It's, one of the great themes. And not least the opening psalm, Beatus Via, the blessed is the man, because that has that extraordinary image that says, kind of makes us not only to have an attitude towards nature, but to see how nature herself shows us images and emblems of who we are and how we ought to be. And that, of course, has the wonderful line, blessed is the man. So it says, he shall be like a tree planted by the waters, who bringeth forth his fruit in due season, and his leaf shall not wither. And that's contrasted with the rootless chaff that's just blown away in the wind. So the very opening, what I did at my project was to write a series, that's a small project, a series of 150 15-line poems in iambic pentameter. So of course, each poem has 150 syllables, and it's a kind of epitome of the Psalms. And to write them in a literary form, which, as it happens, and this was a deliberate choice, of course, on my part, which is called a corona. And corona, of course, as you know, means crown. I mean, we've used it to describe the virus because it has these kind of like the pinnacles on a crown coming out. And the word corona is in the word coronation. And it seemed to me that we could feel God entering into our suffering, that our coronavirus was part of his corona spinnea, his crown of thorns, but that we might also be called still to the crown blossoming, the thorns blossoming again, and finally to the crown of gold. But the corona form consists of writing a poem where the last line of the poem you've just written becomes the first line of the next poem, all the way along until you get to the last line of the last poem. And that is the first line of the first poem. So they're woven together into a kind of crown or chaplet. And I published this book. I wrote it last year. I published it this year at the end of January. It's called David's Crown. And I'm just going to read you one or two. I'll read you the opening one, which is this invocation of this beautiful image of the tree. And I wrote it, I composed it in my head before I kind of wrote it when I got home, standing on a little bridge over the River Granta on my favorite walk here around Linton, where there's a wonderful great horse chestnut planted by the water, and its roots go down into the water, and it holds up these wonderful kind of candle-like blossoms into the morning light. So Beatus Via. Come to the place where every breath is praise, and God is breathing through each passing breeze. Be planted by the waterside, and raise your arms with Christ beneath these rooted trees, who lift their breathing leaves up to the sky. Be rooted too, as still and strong as these, open alike to sun and rain. Arise from meditation by these waters. Bear the fruit of that deep rootedness. Be wise in the tree's long wisdom. Learn to share the secret of their patience. Pass the day in their green fastness and their quiet air. Slowly discern a life, a truth, a way where simple being flowers in delight. Then let the chaff of life just blow away. So that began what was for me a whole sequence. And as I say, I'm going to read to you one or two more. I discerned this great theme of nature, not only delighting in nature for itself, but seeing how it is the other book God has written and how he speaks to us through it. But also, of course, as everybody who's read the Psalms will know, one of the other great themes is justice, and God being the advocate for the poor and the needy, and coming, as it were, to vindicate them. And so I have a poem, I'll read you about that as well. But let me just read you another couple of the ones which are really about finding wisdom in nature herself. So I'll do you the ones on Psalm 8 and Psalm 19, two of my favorite Psalms, of course. Psalm 8 has this, what is man that thou should be, and made him a little lower than the angels to crown with glory, but also has that lovely line about out of the mouths of babes and sucklings thou hast ordained wisdom, which I like. So here's Psalm 8. Before the splendor of the resurrection dawns and transforms the world, I'll watch the lights of heaven, each a glory in their station, harbingers of heaven, keeping nights of watch with us, the moving moon and stars, his handiwork in which he still delights. and I will listen too. Open my ears to every creature that still speaks his name, from babes and sucklings to those crowned with years. For wisdom laughs and lives in both. The flame of love is kindled round the world in old and young. I'll seek him too beyond the tame familiar world, out in the wide and wild, as much in the steep seas and mountain heights as in the startling wisdom of a child. And then, of course, that I always feel a bit of a link between Psalm 8 and Psalm 19, because Psalm 8 has this looking up to the heavens, and then the whole of Psalm 19 is begins with this great declaration: the heavens declare the glory of the Lord, and the firmament showeth forth his handiwork. Night unto night uttereth speech. And then it transitions, you may remember, from a delight in the beauty and regularity and strength and warmth and light of the sun in the sky and the movement of the heavenly bodies. It just immediately begins to talk about God's law, about what is right and true and pure, about his call for justice, and sees these as two aspects of the same thing. So here's my take on Psalm 19. These aren't translations or fresh versions of the Psalms, they're prayers in response to the Psalms. In that still place where earth and heaven meet under mysterious starlight, raise your head and gaze up at their glory. The complete consort dancing, as one poet said of his own words. But these are all God's words, a shining poem waiting to be read afresh in every heart. Now, look towards the brightening east and see the splendid sun rise and rejoice, the icon of his Lord's true light. Be joyful with him. Watch him run his course. Receive the treasure of his light pouring like honeyed gold till day is done, as sweet and strong as all God's laws, as right as all his judgments, and as clean and pure, all given for your growth and your delight. Speaking about your growth and your delight, I have to say I'm so glad we've got out of this rather cold, kind of damp spring we've had, and just these last few days, I have yesterday and today, I must say, I have been receiving, quote my own poem here, I've been receiving the treasure of his light, pouring like honeyed gold till day is done. Well, I mentioned that so many of the Psalms are really calls to speak on behalf of the poor, to recognize God's preferential option for them, as it were. You can't get away from that in the book of Psalms. And one of the Psalms that does that very strongly is Psalm 94. And as it happens, I wrote the response to that just shortly before, and I wrote it in the midst of it was after the murder of George Floyd, and it was the real first wave of the Black Lives Matter protests. And every institution, I think, heard that as a wake-up call to see how have we partaken of injustices, historical injustices in the past, the injustices of slavery, but also continued oppressive patterns, of attitude and trade and so on. And the college, my college asked me to be part of a group that's looking at our own response to legacies of enslavement, but they particularly wanted some sort of public response that they could put up. So I thought, well, this is a pretty, it's a secular college, this is a spiritual Christian poem, but I read the poem to the mistress of the college, and she said, that's exactly what we want. And so I read this poem, long before it was published. It was literally, the ink was scarcely dry on the page. I made a special trip, all masked up and everything, to go into the college chapel, which I hadn't been into for months, and somebody filmed me from a distance reading this. But I read this really, it's a call to move away from a kind of pietistic quietude in faith, where faith is a little bit of an internal compensation for the dumb stuff that happens in the world, but we can not go out and change that stuff. But actually, that's exactly what we need to do. Now, I know when I say we need to cry out for equal rights and justice in this poem, that when I speak to you, I'm preaching to the converted. I know that you know this already, but perhaps this poem will encourage you further in that vocation. So here's my response to Psalm 94. And it moves from the serenity of our faith, using the serenity of our faith as a route from which we can take action, rather than an excuse for not taking action. So Psalm 94, Deus Ultionum. My Saviour stands and keeps my soul serene, but also sends me back into the world to speak his word and challenge the obscene injustices we take for granted, sold as we are on systems that preserve our privilege and barter truth for gold, putting our souls to silence. We reserve our judgment, but the psalmist makes it clear justice is coming for God's poor. We serve him best if we can also serve them here. Rise up and take their part against the proud. Deliver them from harassment and fear. We have been pietistic, quiet, cowed, but we must come out publicly and cry for equal rights and justice. Cry out loud. Well, I rejoice that Christian Aid has exactly that vision, that we serve him best if we can also serve them here, rise up and take their part. And again, I want to be part of it. Thank you to all of you who've been enabling that to happen. I mentioned that in a corona, the last line of the last poem is the first line of the first poem. So I thought we'd go back from that cry for justice just to the great ringing chorus of praise. Of course, the book of Psalms literally means the book of praises, because the Hebrew word psalm means praise. And as you may remember, the last 5 psalms are just this huge doxology from 145 to 150, and 150 is the great one. And of course, I couldn't write the first line of my opening poem on Psalm 1, come to the place with every breath is praise, until I had at least imagined in my mind that I could have a poem that ended with that line. So I'll read you Psalm 150 and then one final completely new poem to round this off. So here is Psalm 150, Laudate Dominum. For buried seeds, the time has come to flower, to blossom into victory and praise. So praise God in his firmament of power, whose only power is love, the power to raise the dead to life, the power to restore the lost and turn our long lament to praise. Oh, praise him for his noble acts and for his great redemption. Praise him with the sound of trumpets. Tune your music at the door he is about to open. Beat the ground with light and loosened feet, for all his ways are glory and all places hallowed grounds. So come and bring him all your nights and days, and come into his courts with joyful song. Come to the place where every breath is praise. So I might have thought, having written those 150 poems and also the quarantine quatrains, I mean, I might have said to my muse, oh, thanks for all the help, let's take a break now. But my muse was just in a good mood. So she said, no, let's keep going. You know, we've still got a few nights together, go for it. So I found myself at last beginning a project I'd long contemplated and kept putting off, which was to try and take up the lovely stories, the archetypal, mythic stories that are really the foundation of our identity, I think, in the British Isles, which are, of course, the matter of Britain, as it used to be called, all the stories of King Arthur and the knights and Galahad and the Grail and Merlin and so on. I've always loved those stories since I was little, and my mother told them to me on my knee, and then I read Roger Lancelin Green's lovely version, and then finally graduated to Mallory himself. And I've taken up that tale, as it were, and I'm gradually working on a long poem in ballad form, telling those stories. But I thought I'd read you the little prelude to that, which is really about what called me or moved me to do it. And I do so because it's very much enfolded in my love of the land, my love of the fields and the valleys and the woodlands and the streams of my own native England, and my many walks in many places, and particularly my visiting of places associated with the Arthurian stories. I feel the land itself has a story to tell us. So I'm going to close with this, which is a kind of, I hope, an earnest of things to come. Again, it's unpublished, and it will, I hope, stand as the prelude to this long sequence of poems. But I'll read it to you now, because I think you'll feel it's got that. I hope you'll feel it's got that celebration of our own land. Christian Aid, we're helping people in our own land and in many lands, but I think each of us knows what it is to love the place that in which we were born and in which we've been nurtured. So this poem is called Take Up the Tale. As I walked out one morning, all in the soft, fine rain, it seemed as though a silver veil was shining over hill and vale, as though some lovely, long-lost spell had made all new again. And through that shimmer in the air, I seemed to hear a sound, as though a distant horn were blown in some lost land that I had known, that seemed to speak from tree and stone, and echo all around. And with the music came these words: "Poet, take up the tale. Take up the tale this land still keeps. In earth and water magic sleeps. The dryad sighs, the naiad weeps, but you can lift the veil. From where the waves wash Cornwall's caves out to the White Horse Vale, this land still holds the tale of old, like hidden treasure, buried gold. Once more the story must be told. Poet, take up the tale. Tell of the king who will return. Tell of the Holy Grail. Tell of old knights and chivalry. Tell of the pristine mystery of Merlin's Isle of Gramarye. Poet, take up the tale. Take up the tale of courtesy. Take up the tale of grace. Revive the land's long memory. Summon the fair folk, let them be. Something of fairy, wild and free, still lingers in this place. Lift up your eyes to see the light on Glastonbury Tor. Then come down from that far green hill to where the sacred waters spill and shine within the chalice well, and listen to their lore. Yea, listen well before you start. Be still ere you begin. See through the surface round about, the noise, the rush, the fear, the doubt. Though modern Britain lies without, fair Logres lives within. You may yet walk through Merlin's Isle, by oak and ash and thorn. The ancient hills do not forget, and you might wake their wisdom yet. Who knows what wonders might be met on this midsummer morn? So I have taken up the tale, to tell it full and free. The tale that makes my heart rejoice, I tell it, for I have no choice. I tell it till another voice takes up the tale from me. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you for all your efforts on behalf of Christian Aid.
And thank you very much, Malcolm. Sometimes it feels that whatever I say after somebody has said something won't do justice to the evening. You've taken us on a journey of our imagination. It's been profound. It's been challenging, justice, yet hope. So thank you so much on behalf of everybody who's been listening this evening. And just thank you also to those people who are listening, Christian Aid supporters. Without you, we couldn't do what we do, and our partners couldn't do what they do. You literally change. You're part of the change process that brings change to people's lives across the world. So I hope you've enjoyed this evening. I'm sure you have, and thank you. Good night.
Thank you.